I think it's important to start by saying that while managing mobility impairment, I'm a frequent flyer with British Airways using my executive membership, and I've always experienced a high standard of service, starting with the welcoming smiles I receive from staff at check-in, helpful staff in the lounge areas, followed by warm, friendly and attentive cabin crew on all of my flights. So despite being mobility impaired, the level of service provided has enabled me to travel and fly independently or take short breaks in Europe with family. And this level of service has been even more valuable when I'm visiting specialist medical facilities or rehabilitation centres abroad, which I do several times a year. However, my recent travel and flight experience showed me that outside of the control of all of those dedicated staff I mentioned, British Airways infrastructure is not looking after its disabled passengers. Moving on, this video story briefly includes events leading up to what was essentially a breach of the Disability Discrimination Act. So on the day of travel, flying out from London Heathrow, it had been raining continuously for over 24 hours, causing widespread flooding and difficult driving conditions. We were late checking in, going through customs, and got to the gate minutes after it had closed, and so missed our flight. But we were kindly offered seats on the next available flight, which was also the last flight of the day. After sitting around until late afternoon, this alternative flight was eventually delayed as well due to the knock-on effect of existing disruptions, and didn't leave Heathrow Airport for almost 3 additional hours more. There's no doubt that spending over 10 hours sitting in the Heathrow Airport lounge before eventually flying was an arduous event, and getting to the destination late that night meant we'd lost an entire day. But I recognised that unpredictable weather meant this event was out of the control of an airline to change. But I'll now share details and talk about our return flight and an exceptionally distressing situation that British Airways did have the ability to control, but failed to do so. Well, it's the final day of our reduced 4-day trip in a country that was having similar wet weather. But it's safe to say that we were looking forward to getting back home to the UK. So when the gate number was showing on the screen in the lounge, we gathered all of our luggage and made our way there. But now close to our flight time, there was still no British Airways staff at the boarding gate, and there was no announcement to suggest any delays, so we continued to wait. Another passenger eventually went online to read information that there was a 2 to 3 hour delay to the plane that was flying into the airport with passengers that would be taking us back to Heathrow. Later than scheduled, we were eventually on board the plane, seatbelts on, going through the security procedure and waiting for clearance to taxi down the runway. But almost an hour later, still sat on the plane, the pilot announced that due to poor weather, the backlog of delayed flights, there was now insufficient time to taxi to the runway before the airport was due to close. So we would have to disembark and fly back to Heathrow the next day. Once off the plane and inside a virtually empty airport, we made our way to the British Airways desk. Some members of staff here appeared inexperienced and overwhelmed by the volume of questions being asked by anxious passengers who were being directed to a stand holding a QR code that, when scanned, contained address details of a layover hotel. A member of staff was informing people that there was a coach that would take us all to the hotel. And when I mentioned that I wouldn't be able to use the steps to board the coach, I was advised to book a taxi to the layover hotel and keep my receipt. I asked whether the hotel would be suitable as regards to access and my mobility scooter. I was assured that access into the hotel had been taken into consideration and we would also not have to pay for this accommodation. Taken by taxi, By the time we reached the layover hotel, it was very late in the evening and I was struggling with acute fatigue. My husband and taxi driver helped me out of the car, opened up my scooter so that I could sit on it, while the driver unloaded our hand luggage. But it wasn't until the driver had driven away that we realised that there was an unusually high step to get into the hotel. With no alternative entrance available, my husband had to carry me, and the reception desk was not immediately visible. You know, right at this point, I was filled with a sense of complete dread as I thought about the fact that this trip could quite easily have been one of those journeys and flights I routinely take on my own. But once at the reception desk of this layover hotel, the first thing that struck us was a musty, unpleasant smell that intensified by the time we reached and barely entered our allocated room. I say barely because, as well as having a disagreeable smell, the room was virtually inaccessible for any wheelchair user. The random stains on carpet and scuffed furniture in the room did not give the room a particularly clean feel either. As my husband took a look around the room, he commented that even if the room was wheelchair accessible, there was a large step up to the shower cubicle, so I would not have been able to wash or have a shower anyway. I'd seen all I needed to see. In a distressed state, I eventually called the hotel that we had been staying in during our trip and was relieved to hear that they had one last suitable room available that night. With this news, we went back to the reception desk and asked the lady there to call us a taxi. Angry, frustrated, disappointed, I had previously come to assume that as British Airways is a British airline, they would be closely following the Disability Discrimination Act, with the priority required to ensure a high level of compliance so that any of the hotels they associate with for such unexpected events are fully accessible and have an acceptable allocation of wheelchair accessible rooms with walk-in shower facilities that can be used by their disabled and special assistance passengers. I initially wrote a letter of complaint that was handled by customer relations, who offered an apology and goodwill Avios points. And while I appreciate the opportunity to fly with British Airways using the points next time, I was not satisfied. So I wrote a brief letter to Sean Doyle, CEO of British Airways. I received a second response, and this time it was from British Airways Premium Escalations team. Now, I'm not wholly convinced that the Premium Escalation team is an altogether different department from the General Customer Service Relations team, but I'm prepared to trust that British Airways are focusing better attention on areas that affect their disabled passengers. Have you or someone you know had a similar experience as a disabled passenger travelling with British Airways? You can post your comment around this video, or if you wish, you can contact me. So if you want, click the link that you'll find associated with this video, and I look forward to speaking with you. Bye bye.